We all know the feeling at the end of a very long day. You get home from work or class or any other kind of obligations you had, and you just feel exhausted. Now, on these sort of nights, what do you find yourself doing? Maybe you're watching TV, maybe you're eating junk food. If you're like me, you're probably doing both, and also online shopping for makeup that you simply don't need. And I'm not necessarily proud of this behavior, but I acknowledge that it comes up. And even if your vices are different, you're less prone to impulsively buying things from Sephora.com, this feeling probably resonates. When we're mentally drained, it's really easy to just be a little bit more impulsive, a little bit more irresponsible. And of course, being the daughter of a therapist, I was very curious about where this behavior comes from. So I wanted to investigate it further. And the concept that I came across was the idea of ego depletion. Ego depletion is the principle that willpower, or self-control, is a finite reserve that we draw upon, and as we draw upon it, we can gradually deplete it. I found this to be an incredibly helpful way to contextualize human behavior, so I wanted to unpack it for you all today. To do that, I want to start with what is the ego, how do we deplete it, and lastly, what can we even do with this information? So first of all, what is the ego? Well, we're not talking about ego in the colloquial sense of self-importance. What we're addressing here is Freud's division of the psyche. Of course, Freud is a very controversial figure, so we're ignoring pretty much everything else that he said, but we're going to hold on to his idea of ego. Ego is the active center of self-control, self-regulation. It's logical, it's planning, it's organized, and it keeps us from always going with our impulses. So how do we deplete the ego? Well, we deplete the ego like we deplete any muscle in the body. When you use it, it gradually fatigues. Think of doing push-ups, something I haven't done in a very long time. When you do push-ups, you're calling upon different muscle groups. And as you keep calling upon them, they just get more and more tired. And eventually, you can't do any more push-ups. The same is true for the ego. We call upon it when we resist temptation, when we try to push away our impulses, when we force ourselves to do things that we just don't feel like doing. As we exercise the ego in these ways, our resource, our reserve here starts to gradually decline. I think a really helpful way to contextualize and illustrate ego depletion is in the original study that brought ego depletion onto the map. Ego depletion was first studied in 1998 at Case Western Reserve University by Baumeister and Tice. These were two psychologists who one day decided to flex their baking skills, and they baked fresh cookies in their lab. As I'm sure you all know, when you bake fresh cookies, this sweet, intoxicating aroma of sugar and chocolate perfumes the whole environment. So they baked these cookies, and they piled them very, very tall on a beautiful platter, and then next to them placed a small bowl of radishes. Two very different food groups going on here. Baumeister and Tice then brought in a herd of college students as volunteers, and they divided these students into two groups. Half of them were assigned to only eat cookies, and half of them were assigned to only eat radishes. Now I want you to imagine the headspace of each of these two groups. If you're assigned to only eat freshly baked cookies that are right in front of you, you're probably very excited. Maybe you're thinking, that's awesome, they smell really good, psychology rocks, I'm so excited to be here. If you're assigned to only eat radishes, while there are fresh cookies right in front of you, you're probably thinking, what did I do to deserve this? This is very unfair. Those cookies look awesome, and I want to eat them, but I can't, so I'm having a bad time. And even if it's not that explicit or dramatic, you get what I'm going for here. One option is much more tempting than the other. Baumeister and Tice left the students alone to mingle and eat their assigned foods, and then later they came back and put each student in a room. Every student was asked to complete an impossible puzzle. This puzzle had no solution, so Baumeister and Tice weren't looking at problem-solving skills or puzzle-solving capabilities, but rather a test of frustration tolerance. How long could the students bear to work on this frustrating task until they eventually had to give up? The hypothesis is that the students who had eaten cookies had a full tank of self-control, of self-regulation. They could then spend this energy working on this puzzle. The students who had eaten radishes, they had to actively stop themselves from eating those cookies, and so they were tapping into this reserve and depleting it a little bit. They would have less energy, therefore, to contribute to working on this task. And sure enough, the results were that the students who had eaten cookies lasted for 19 minutes, whereas the students who had eaten radishes lasted for 8. 19 minutes versus 8 minutes, that's a very substantial difference. And it's also worth noting that the control group, the students who had not been tempted by food at all, also lasted for 19 minutes. So no temptation and giving into temptation has a positive effect on performance, but trying to resist temptation has a very negative impact on performance. And this probably makes sense for people. This is why we give up on diets, why we fail at New Year's resolutions every single year. Eventually, our ego just empties and we don't have more energy to contribute. And I'm sure that this is very demoralizing, so I do want to assure you that there are options. When we're aware of our behavior, we can make a choice about how we want to handle it. So first, one thing that you can do is to try to counteract the effects of ego depletion. To do this, Baumeister and Vo say that the antidote to ego depletion is motivation. So do things that motivate you, that have incentive. Try to get more in touch with your goals and the bigger picture. I know as a senior in my spring semester, it can be really hard to motivate myself to do some assignments, but I can remember that I want to go to grad school, and so it's really worth investing in my education while I have the chance. Alternatively, we can choose to accept that ego depletion is part of life. It's part of the human experience, and we don't need to be so hard on ourselves when it comes up. We can enjoy binge-watching Netflix shows, eating chocolate, and our eyeshadow palettes when they come in the mail. And we can appreciate it that it's all part of the journey. Either way, hopefully you now have a greater understanding of some of the complex psychological structures that drive us and drive our behavior, because it is only through awareness of our behavior that we can choose whether or not to change it. Thank you.
We have questions from the judges.
Yeah. My major? Great question. International Political Economics. It's an interdisciplinary major of economics and government with a focus on international relations and behavioral economics. Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so having a mom as a psychologist, it was always a dinner table conversation to talk about human behavior and our feelings. I remember being maybe 5 years old in a fight in kindergarten and using I feel statements to describe what went down. So it's just always been part of the family culture, part of how we talked. I'm definitely very interested in psychology. I don't think I'll pursue it professionally, but I'm very grateful to have this knowledge and this kind of lens to view the world that I'll hold on for the rest of my life. Yes, so ego depletion has been studied pretty widely since 1998. There have been studies, like what the studies were, is that what you're interested in? What the studies consisted of, is that? Sure, absolutely. So there have been other studies that look at ego depletion in the context of just emotional depletion, so trying to withhold emotion and then situations that are conducive to emotional outbursts. There have been other studies that talk about ego depletion more so being about attention regulation, and so it's kind of unclear if ego depletion is about maybe motivation or attention or emotions even. So there are some competing theories about what the ego actually is. There are also some studies that suggest that ego depletion is not always consistent. We don't know the timeline of how long it takes the ego to replenish. So it's not necessarily rock solid in terms of an anatomical, physiological event, but the overarching principle of kind of tiring from doing something that's difficult is pretty well established in psychology.